evening, everybody. Welcome to the Wilmington School Committee meeting. It is June 27th, 2018, and it is exactly 7 p.m. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Tristan, all are in attendance except for Julie Broussard. All right, we'll move right to the approval of items by consensus. We'll start with approval of minutes, June 13th, 2018. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Mrs. Burns, thank you. Second, Mr. Talbot. All in favor? That's unanimous. We have approval of warrants. Grants 434 and 435, revolving 242 and 243, local 64 and 65, food services 47, 48, 49, 50, and payroll June 20th, 2018. Do I have a motion? Mr. Bjork, thank you. Seconded by Mr. Ragsdale. All in favor? That is unanimous. Warrant circuit breaker CB 22. A motion? Thank you, Mr. Ragsdale, seconded by Mr. Talbot. All in favor? That's 3 in favor, 2 abstentions. And then warrants SPED 42, 43, 44, 45, and 46. Do I have a motion? Mr. Talbot, thank you. Mr. Ragsdale seconds. All in favor? 3 in favor, 2 abstentions. Okay. There is no old business. So we are going to move right to new business, and I will hand this one over to Mr. Ruggiero.
Good evening. Tonight, we're going to recognize Mr. Robert Seeker for a perfect attendance award. I'll ask Ms. Peters to come up and with Robert.
Thank you. I've given a lot of awards in my tenure in Wilmington, but this is the first. This is presented to Robert Joseph Seeker in recognition of your perfect attendance for 13 years of school. That's 2,340 days. Congratulations on behalf of the Wilmington Public Schools for your dedication and hard work. This is truly a remarkable achievement.
On behalf of the school committee, congratulations, Robert. That's really exciting. And I keep telling my children about you. So I think they love it, or maybe not. I'm not sure, actually. Are there any comments from the board?
Just another. Congratulations. That's an amazing achievement. Well done.
All right. Thank you. All right, so we will move. Oh, sorry.
His parents might want to share the secret of this because some of us would love to know. Just saying.
A lot of vitamins.
A lot of vitamins. Very good.
Really, it's all him, to be honest with you. There were many times we said to him, you can just stay home, and he said, I'd rather go to school than miss school. So it's really to his credit.
That's wonderful. Congratulations again. You're welcome.
All right. So I don't have this written, but I think normally we say, we would love for you to stay. You're more than welcome to stay. But if you would like to depart, we also understand that. So I'll throw that out there, but feel free to stay for the whole meeting. Or leave when it
We're an
suits you.
exciting crew.
We do love having an audience,
For
but
the
we won't
audience.
be upset if you decide to depart. Okay, next we're going to look at policy IKB, which is the homework policy. This is the first reading. So our motions will be to approve the first reading of policy IKB, and then we'll move to approve the deletion of IKBE homework due to the incorporation of both policies into policy IKB. So Mr. Gallagher is going to present and run us through this policy and all the work that's been done.
Yes, great, thank you. Look at this. A few slides and kind of we'll go over the process of the committee and all the work that really went into taking a look at this. There we go. the last school committee, the technology's working, so. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. I just jinxed myself.
Give it a second. There it goes.
Oh, there we go. All right, so this was, this committee was formed in the beginning of this school year, towards the end of last school year, with some concerns from parents and students regarding homework and kind of the stresses at home. So we set up this great committee made up of Ms. Bryson, Mr. Mullis, Peggy Kane, Joe Newhouse, Leslie Quick, Kevin Riley, Katie Jackson, Bob Moriello, Patrice Lund, Linda Peters, Christine McMillan, and myself, to kind of, first of all, take a look at current research and current practices, best practices for homework across the nation. So this discussion that we had in the Wilmington Public Schools is a discussion that is going on nationwide, and kind of taking a look at these best practices and what's best for students and families. So in the beginning of the year, we really focused our first few meetings on best practices, and I provided some of those articles in your packet that you can take a look at of kind of what the trends are going around the country. Mid-year, with the committee's work, we developed staff and parent surveys that went out throughout the Wilmington Public Schools at all grade levels. And at the same time, with that going on, we're also working hard on hiring Dr. Brand and going through a superintendent search. So I just want to credit the committee members that were serving on both and our teachers that also provided input. It was a long process for the superintendent and then also the work we were doing. And at the end of the year, we compiled all of the best practices, take a look at the student and parent surveys and faculty surveys, and then we started to look at our current policy. And then the second half or the end of our revisions, we did a lot of work. So with that being said, here are some of the key resources that we used, along with some of the articles that you have in your packet. Rethinking Homework by Kathy Vatterott. Visible Learning by Dr. John Hattie. This is a real important research that's going on in education today. And basically, it's taking mega data of all the best practices within education across the world. And similar to the Watson computer, where they're taking a lot of the medical research, and the computer, for example, with the Watson computer can analyze 25 million articles, if we're talking like medical, 25 million articles within 24 hours, and then can give results of diagnosis and processes. So this mega data analysis, Dr. John Hattie's done the same thing. So they've taken over, I think, close to 500 million different types of research on best practices for schools, and compiled all of that. And you can take a look at the research, but basically anything a 0.4 or higher is going to have a significant impact or positive impact on student achievement, and anything 0.4 or lower can have a negative impact on student learning. And basically the homework piece came in at 2.5. So we're not saying to take away homework, but we need to understand traditional homework, with all the research that we looked at, including what the trends going across the country, that traditional homework may have a negative impact or no impact on student learning. So this is kind of some of the research that supported this. Fear Isn't Always Equal by Rick Wormley, and then other resources, which are the articles, other district policies with other districts that are changing policy, and then our survey data. So that was our mid-year, the beginning of the year, and then the survey data we analyzed. So this last piece in the spring, we broke into groups and we reviewed our current policy. We had, within the group, suggestions and revisions, then we kind of compiled all of that, looking at our current policy. And then we created a first draft on May 18th. Then the committee met again. We revised that original draft again on May 21st. And we completed kind of like another draft on May 22nd. And we knew we were having the end of the year meeting with the committee. And then once again on June 12th, we looked at that draft that was created on May 22nd. We revised the policy once again. And the committee had really 3 options. One, at the end of this year on June 12th, we could take a look at all of our policies and say that the current policy is significant, is going to work for us and not to recommend any revisions. The second idea we had on the 12th was we still have this policy. We could continue the work and move it into next year, table it for this year, and then pick up the work again next school year, beginning in September. Or are we comfortable and ready for this revision? The committee overwhelmingly felt we're ready to submit a revision to the subcommittee. And on the 13th of June, we submitted the first reading to the policy subcommittee, and that's what you have in front of you today. So there was a lot of hours, a lot of work that went in. We really crafted, I think, a best practice homework policy for the district, for teachers, students, parents, and we felt pretty comfortable with moving this forward. We had a lot of dialogue, remember, with the teachers at all different grade levels, and the philosophies from the high school to the middle school and the elementary school. And once again, we were in consensus of feeling like this is a good direction to move, to recommend the changes and the revisions of the policy that you have in front of you today. And that was the entire process, and I'm giving it a 2 thumbs up for all the work they did.
Comments, questions? Mrs. Burns?
I know that I've shared a ton of questions around.
Sure.
Around this, that if you don't mind, I'd like to see if we can further discuss. I like it. I think it's a very well-written, I think, best practice piece. I think one of my concerns I wanted to share was that I think that's probably the best label for it, because it really can't be executed. And my concern is a couple-fold, that I just want to make sure that the policy reads well to the common parent, someone who may not have that educational background to decipher some of the, well, I don't want to say vocabulary, because I think everyone can figure it out, but, I just want to make sure it's clear enough that people can understand. And that's, I'm not terribly worried about it, but I just wanted to bring it forth, because I am grateful and very appreciative to you and the rest of the committee members to formulate such a robust best practice sheet. But I did want to go back to an area which was removed from the previous one. I was lucky enough to have sat at the time when the original homework committee came about in 2012, because of the unequalness of homework, particularly at the middle school, where some houses were getting more and some were getting less. And we're just trying to find a good guideline. And with regards to the time expectations, to your response, I can absolutely understand that children learn differently. And what takes 20 minutes may take another 30 or an hour. And if it does take a child over an hour, then that's when accommodations and modifications should be implemented, when there's a struggle, that parent and teacher communication. And so that's why I don't know, I think ideally I would like that expectation of what the guideline looks like. And in one of the articles that you supplied from the American Psychological Association is Homework a Necessary Evil. It does speak to, even in this way of comprising it, that even when homework is helpful, there can be too much of a good thing. There is a limit to how much kids can benefit from home study, says Cooper. It says, he agrees that an off-cited rule of thumb that students should do no more than 10 minutes a night per grade level, from about 10 minutes in first grade up to a maximum of 2 hours in high school. Both the National Education Association and National Parent-Teacher Association support that limit. Beyond that point, kids don't absorb much useful information, Cooper says. In fact, too much homework can do more harm than good. And I think even maybe written more in that kind of as a method, and I know I certainly do not want to harness any teachers in their creativity in teaching. That's not my objective. But to just, I guess, set a sort of a general expectation of what it looks like, you know? There may be some who will do a little less, some who will do a little more, but have some sort of bar that to try to stay within, I guess, is what I would offer the committee to consider.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you want to?
Sure. I mean, we had those discussions on times and working with the teachers. It ties in, when you're looking at setting timing guidelines, it's a catch-22 in the sense that working with the teachers, basically, we're trying to bring the homework policy back down into the classroom, where the teachers have autonomy, in the sense that if you're teaching third grade and I'm teaching third grade, and I taught the standard for the day, and I'm comfortable that the students have learned that standard, I may not assign homework that night. You, on the other hand, you may have taught that same standard for the day and feel the kids need a little bit more practice.
But that
Right.
doesn't prohibit them from following that autonomy, which I strongly support, you know? It's just, because I think parents also need that expectation, what's reasonable, because if you're asking them, but their child is struggling, it's a measure of which they themselves can say, hey, it's supposed to be around this time frame. It's way over this timeline, you know, it's kind of creating that communication and outreach. It, you know, it may be balanced, but it's, you know, I'm not using them as a hard, stead, black and white rule, but just as to what the National Education Association and Parent-Teacher Association recommends. You know what I mean? Not saying this is what you have to do, but just.
Well, that's the articles we gave, so we didn't just do all one side of, no, you know, we have some articles where there's no homework policy, we have some articles that recommended time, we have some research that says if you're looking at differentiation, you're looking at individualized instruction, how can you have 25 minutes for 300 third graders is the bar of consistency and equity. So working with the teachers and looking at the overall best practices, we felt that the key is for the administration, for the teachers and the parents to collaborate, the administration to communicate to parents the homework policy, really understanding that the time limits that were in our existing policy weren't, were still creating problems. So although you had time limits at every grade level, there was still all of that inconsistency. So working with the teachers in the committee and looking at the overall big picture for the school committee, it's almost kicking it back towards the schools and the administration to saying, here are our best practices. We fully understand that school should be an extension outside of school, where there's a lot of activities, a lot of students are being involved, and you can, if your child does not get homework that night, it's because they learn the standard. And we're differentiating classroom to classroom and student to student and taking away, you know, the opposite of 25 minutes for third grade, 45 minutes for fourth grade, an hour, you know, for fifth grade. Because the other issue of that too is some teachers are assigning homework to fit in with those time limits, where they feel like, well, I have to assign homework because, you know, my colleagues are assigning homework, instead of assigning homework for practice that students need to work on a skill. So
See,
we had a lot of those discussions throughout the year.
I'm not supporting busy work, but I think for new parents who are entering the school district, who, who are just trying to get it, I think setting some sort of direction, you know what I mean? It's not supposed to box anybody in. But I think with supporting the teachers, which I wholeheartedly do in this realm, I also want to support the parents in being able to understand what this policy means and what's reasonable and what's unreasonable. And when are red flags coming up for their child, so.
I think what I hear Mrs. Burns saying is that it does say on, let me see the third page, the research suggests that individual students may require less or more time for assignments. If students are consistently spending significantly longer on assignments, families should consult with the teachers to let them know of their child's struggles. I think what Mrs. Burns is saying is that what does that mean? If there's no hard line, they should not spend more than this, then how are parents supposed to know what too long is? Which was, when we were doing this work, we were thinking in terms of the big picture and not creating more busy work, that if teachers think it needs to be this amount, that it could just then be, okay, well, they'll just have them do that. And really thinking more deeply about what does it mean to send something home for students to do? And how do I really make sure it's aligned with what's happening in the classroom? And that, with the time limit, was sort of like we kept and we went back and, this was,
I can
we
recognize-
had
I
this
can
conversation.
recognize that
So I'm
struggle.
hearing you, but now
I
that
don't
you're,
wanna- yeah, I
I'm
don't
hearing
want it
that
to be
side
that-
as to what is too long? Is there something we can sort of say that says, and this is too, because if someone is new and coming into the district, they might say, well, what does that mean if it's too long? I don't know. And then you get more of the parents talking to parents and trying to figure out, well, I don't know, how long does it take your child, and how long does it take your child?
It just opens it up for too much perspective. You know what I mean? Not everyone has that same perspective. And it's just trying to, a guideline. I'm not looking for a hard, fast, it should be no more than 20 minutes for second graders. Looking for, ideally, this is what is recommended by here. You know what I mean? Not putting it in a hard, fast, because you saw how the other policy was written, and it didn't meet that, but.
Mr. Buick.
I come from the other side. My favorite thing about this is the elimination of those times. I think that in this day and age where everything is about differentiated instruction, I think if a parent is concerned about wanting to know how much time, then they can have a discussion with the teacher. Especially since student A may take 15 minutes to do an assignment, student B may take 20 minutes to do that assignment, student C may take 25 minutes to do that assignment. So I think that I'm thrilled that time limits are
I'm
gone.
not looking to have that entered back in, because I understand the rigidity with that specific time area, but kind of giving a rule of thumb or a basis, you know what I mean? This is what's supported. I'm using this as an example only because it's presented here. I'm not looking for the previous
Right.
entry that was first graders no more than 15 minutes. I'm not looking, it doesn't have to be that black and white, but even that general terminology where it cites that off-cited rule of thumb, it's a rule of thumb, in that students should do no more than 10 minutes a night per grade level. It's a rule of thumb. It's not a hard, fast, this is what you need to do. It just offers a guideline. I'm thinking, if I'm clarifying it correctly, that teachers can say, well, this is what we're undertaking for curriculum. It's going to, I expect my students it may take them 15, maybe 15 minutes, break it up. You know what I mean?
But what if they don't need homework for that night because
And they
the whole
don't.
class
It's
got
not
it?
saying that you have to, it's not saying that you have to offer homework. When homework is offered, it's a rule of thumb. It's not, you can't give more than 10 minutes. It's a rule of thumb is 10 minutes per grade level. It's not saying you're required.
I think, just being on both sides and being, the other great feedback is in the upper levels. So if we're saying high school students should have 2 hours of homework, and Linda Peters will understand this because she probably has a lot of the complaints that I used to have, that kids are spending 4 hours of homework because they have 8 classes, they have 8 different teachers. So if the rule of, and a lot of those teachers aren't collaborating with how much homework they're giving, so when you have 2 hours, 30 minutes per class or whatever the time is, what starts to happen is the kids with multiple teachers are, if I'm a teacher, I'm only assigning a half hour, and Steve's a math teacher, and he thinks he's only gonna assign like 40 minutes, and this teacher assigns 1 hour. So it starts to pile up, and our argument is, the philosophy here is the school committee is setting the best practices, but then it comes down to the administration and the teachers to articulate to parents what good homework practice is gonna look like in that class. And if I flip it on as a parent, I can tell you when too much homework. I don't need a time limit. I've been there with, my child crying over frustration of not understanding an assignment. And so what, more likely than not, the child or that student's not gonna come into that class and tell the teacher, I didn't understand this assignment at all, I didn't know what I was doing. What they're going to say, I forgot my homework, I didn't do it. So what ends up happening, it creates an undue stress on the family and the child. And I'm sure if we asked a lot of parents, from your top students to students that struggle, this homework battle at night is, it can create a lot of anxiety. So what we're saying is allowing the principals and the teachers to have this dialogue moving into next year with the new policy. And some teachers may say to the parents, your child may not get homework if, they're learning the standard. Elementary, the best practice that we all know is nightly reading. That's when we're looking at closing the achievement gap. If they're nightly reading, that's going to be beneficial. So, we had a lot of these discussions, and from the teachers and the principals that were on that, they felt by communicating best practices to, their students, their teachers, and keeping this on the forefront, they felt pretty comfortable with moving this forward. So I think that, it's school committee's decision, and where it's just the first reading and the first dialogue around this, but I think the policy, looks good. It takes in consideration a lot of the differentiation that goes on at home too. What's the struggles at home for a lot of different families.
Do other board members have any comments before I'm just gonna see if
No,
anyone over
please go
there
ahead,
has anything to say.
I looked this over, and, with time limits, each night, and I just remember when I went to high school, there was a teacher that basically you had all semester to get the homework done. If you didn't get it done on Tuesday night, and he had a list, and he's like, you missed this one. You can do it and make up for it, you'll lose points for it, but, I didn't know if that was something that, instead of saying, you have to have it here tomorrow, you can turn it in later, instead of them saying, I forgot it. Or, you can say, well, then bring it in tomorrow.
Well, I think a big piece of this was to provide the buildings and the administrators and then the teachers with the autonomy to make those sorts of decisions. And so for teachers to feel more empowered to say things like, in their open house, there'll only be this amount of, you shouldn't, if your child is doing more than, in third grade, more than 25 minutes a night, please let me know. As opposed to feeling like, oh, here's what it says here, I must do this, was kind of a lot of the feedback we were getting from teachers, that they were sort of feeling kind of restricted by this in a way, and sort of then adhering to it in a way that wasn't really authentic in terms of giving kids what they actually need. And so we're trying to provide the teachers with that. Some teachers will do packets where it's due on Friday, and so it's, kids in elementary and middle might be kind of time managing and saying, oh, I have this due Wednesday, and I'm actually gonna do it early so I don't have to do anything tomorrow night on it. But teachers and the building making those sorts of decisions, as opposed to it being here, like assignments will not be due the next day. Like, we wouldn't want to do anything like that. That kind of told teachers how to use homework, because then I think it pulls away from the homework being authentic and meeting the needs of all kids. Mr. Ragsdale?
I'd like to go just high level for a second, and I have my own sense of this from looking at kind of the sequencing of the drafts and where we ended up. but Sean and maybe Jen, since you were both on the committee, can address this. What would we say if we were trying to give kind of like a high-level summary of the change in philosophy from the old policy to the new policy? How would we summarize that? That, you know, our old policy was A, and we think that we're trying to get to a new philosophy of B, and in order to get there, the most important changes that we've made are, you know, X, Y, and Z. I was wondering if we can get a little bit of kind of that high-level summary.
Sure. I think when we were, when we were looking at the policy and looking at best practice, we felt the old policy, before the revisions, was very structured, was to the point where we were looking at homework and assigning homework, lending itself to, well, I need to assign homework because if I'm not assigning homework, you know, some parents might think that, you know, I'm not a good teacher or I'm not following through. So we felt that the time limit, especially with the whole philosophy of, you know, inclusionary practices, with your DCAP, with differentiated instruction, how can you look at time limits and set those, you know, almost like one size fits all? So 25 minutes tonight, you know, you shouldn't, you know, even if I said you shouldn't be spending more than 25 minutes on an assignment, how do you know, like, for the 30 kids in your class or the 20 students in your class? So that's why when we're talking about best practice, we wanted to be less structured with the school committee policy, share best practice, current research, so parents can look at this, teachers can look at this, principals can look at this and say, wow, this is good practice. Plus, in there, it also takes in consideration home life and struggles at home, and be cognizant of, if you're assigning technology, does every child in your class have access to technology? So when you start looking at those best practices and you start to read through those, it kind of shifts the homework, instead of structured time, more to best practice, the idea of practicing a skill, and giving autonomy to principals and teachers and parents. And as I said, I wouldn't need to look at, as a parent, you know, going through the whole, you know, I'm at the other end, college tuition though, it's worse. But I'm at the other end of this. But what I'm saying is, we know when homework is becoming an issue at home. We know when it's being stressful and anxious, and that our students, our children are dealing with. So we felt like this policy is more best practices, user-friendly, and brings people together. So that's kind of, I think, the difference between the old one and the new one. And really, it lends itself to more of inclusionary practices, differentiation, and we're going to assign, we're going to start to begin to assign homework not on time and not a blanket for all 25 students, but really on the needs of individual students. So if we're doing fractions, for example, and I struggled with fractions, I may have 3 problems that night. If you have someone that needs, you know, that's doing very well, they may have a little bit more. So I think we take all that in consideration, and I think the policy really lends itself to communication with parents, teachers, and the administration. So that's my take. I'm not sure if you feel the same way.
Well, I think that, to
And we
answer-
kept a lot of, the old policy was not necessarily bad, and we kept a lot
We
of
did
the
keep a lot.
philosophy, the bullet points, the best practices in the old policy. We just kind of, I think, revised it on current research on best practices, and then we really took out, as Mr. Bjork said, the timelines of that restriction.
And I think also, Mr. Ragsdale, on the bottom of the last page, the 5 characteristics of best homework, we kind of kept going back to that and saying, does what we're doing align with these best practices? So if we're, and I think it kind of clearly outlines, and we spent a lot of time on, it should be meaningful. What does that look like? What does that mean? And we had really great dialogue about what does meaningful homework look
Right.
like. And so in that if it's meaningful and if they're not, if it's really meant for them and it's sort of the competence and we're differentiating, then are we so worried that our parents sitting there thinking, oh, it should only be this amount of time, the more we talked about best practices, the less the time seemed to be an issue. It was sort of, well, if we're doing all these things,
Right.
then we're not really worried about time. And if parents know their child is struggling, then they need to say, this isn't working for my child, not because it took an hour and 25 minutes, but because this isn't good homework for them. It's not meeting these guidelines of best practice. And I think that's where we kind of kept coming back to, if we have the time, it takes away from the meaningful piece of homework that we really want our students to be, our kids to be receiving. We want them to come home and want to do it and be able to do it. And if they can't, then that's a signal to students and parents to say, this isn't working, and to begin that dialogue with the teachers. And I think that's why, so I hear you, but I just understand that feeling of like, oh, but if we take that away, then we'll get 5 hours of homework. But I don't think I think it's gonna actually, if teachers and administrators are looking at this, and then administrators are saying to teachers, we wanna make sure that when we send homework home, we're kind of checking off these bullet points, then I actually think the homework is gonna drastically change, and students and kids are really going to sort of see it in a different light. And someone might spend 2 hours on something that's really meaningful to them, that they're
Right.
excited about and they're engaged and they wanna do. If they're not struggling, that might be an okay use of their time. And so I think that's where we sort of came into this. It made the most sense from the committee to eliminate those time limits. That it was so I understand, because I think we knew we'd get here and then it'd be like, wait a minute, what do you mean that's not there anymore?
Right.
But it took away so much from, I think, the authenticity of of this policy. Does that make sense?
Makes sense.
I think you make a very strong point, and I'm in complete agreement with the characteristics piece. Of course, I'm not as well-versed in that educational realm, so I think that was a great thing to point out. As policy drives action, I just want to ensure that the policy is clear enough. And I'm going to bring it up again with the middle school and the disparity amongst houses and how homework's dispersed. We're not talking about not doing homework one night. We're talking about a house that doesn't often get homework, and when it is, it's, but again, is it meaningful? You know what I mean? As opposed to another house that's getting,
Correct.
and I think that has been what I've heard over the years, the most vocal point with parents in trying to work with staff, in trying to find, well, how much is too much? And is it just that my child is struggling, or is it just busy work? When you've got middle schoolers spending 2-3 hours on homework, that's where the concern arises. And I just want to ensure, and I think that's where my concerns, it's where why I wanted to address it is
Correct.
that I want to ensure that this is actionable. And when I mean actionable, I mean supporting the discussion with administrators, teachers, and parents collaboratively in order for it to be executed as we intend it to be. I
And
think
I-
that's where my overall intent
Correct.
is.
Yeah, and we felt the same way, and in the comparison of one teacher versus the next, or one group versus the next, we kind of take that out, with the idea of homework is gonna be assigned, with the learning of the standards, and one child may get some homework while the other doesn't one night, but the idea of the administration and the administrators that were on our committee is really communicating this policy on a regular basis throughout the year, and not, just go over it in the beginning. It's really, and the school committee can monitor the new policy, with feedback too. But once again, when we had the time limits that were in the existing policy, it was more structured, you still had those discrepancies. Now you can go back and say, all right, here is what we agree is best practice. And just like Ms. Bryson said, is this assignment following these best practices? And then you can have dialogues with your teachers and students, and
It can always be revisited too.
always.
Thank you again for the work that you and the committee have invested in this policy. Because I don't want it to make it appear that,
Sure.
But
But
I do appreciate it, because I think
Correct.
it's very well written.
And the same discussions that we just had for about a half hour went on for I don't know.
7 hours?
Every meeting, we had these great discussions, and going back, just as Ms. Bryson said, what's best for kids, and let's try to do what's best for kids. And I think that was the entire focus of the committee, including the teachers, and Peggy Kane, you know, she was awesome. She really was. So
Thank you
I'm
very
gonna miss her, so.
Thank you very much. I
Yeah,
appreciate
you're
it.
very welcome.
A couple of times that you mentioned that, you know, one student might get a few more problems because they need a little more practice, someone else might not. How much does this policy contemplate individual assignments for students in the class? Because at a certain level, that also becomes quite a burden if a teacher is expected to individualize homework assignments for, you know, 20 students on daily assignments.
Right, and so I think that's the, you know, going back to the principals and working with the staff, I think that's going back to that policy, you know, what's best practice. So instead of assigning a packet that's due at the end of the year, you know, maybe, or 50 math problems on a night, maybe the math problems are, you know, 2 to 4, differentiated. So the idea is when we send an assignment home, it should be a skill that, you know, using it more as a formative assessment, a skill that's been learned and practiced, and not necessarily before we send that assignment home to students where the skill hasn't been learned at all. And that leads to, instead of being a little bit uncomfortable, and I kind of understand the assignment, to I have no idea what I'm doing, anxiety. So I think it's just taking this policy, bringing it back to the principals, bringing it back to the teachers, to the classroom, to the parents, and everyone really working together.
I also have a couple of implementation questions. So with a change like this, where we're asking the teachers to take more autonomy and to individualize the assignments, to be thinking less about kind of rigidly, oh, you know, how many problems will equal 30 minutes or equal 40 minutes. What kind of training, professional development, how do we communicate this to the teachers and bring them into, so they can actually implement it successfully? I mean, this is true of not just homework policy. This is a general policy question of all policies, that there's the policy, and then there's, is it actually being faithfully implemented and executed?
Well, I think it goes back, you know, once again, to the administration, in the beginning, the principals working with the staff, communicating best practice, and understanding that, you know, we're not requiring time, you know, time limits or time on the assignments, and we should be, you know, we have a great staff here. I'm, you know, working with the teachers now, I think by developing best practices, taking times out and really working with the staff. I think working with staff at CIT meetings, I don't think they need an overhaul of professional or PD in the sense of, you know, what is this going to look like? I think it's just really working with the staff to develop purposeful, meaningful homework and understand that, you know, it's okay. You don't have to assign homework every night, or it's okay if your students have learned the standard in 9th grade, you just, you know, covered cellular respiration, and you're feeling pretty good that they learned the lesson for the day, then maybe they're not going to be getting homework. So I think it's always a work in progress. Anytime you're working with curriculum and best practices and doing what's best for kids, but from working with the teachers in this group and also working with the administration, we felt pretty good. And the other piece too is the survey results. It was time. When we analyzing some of the staff feedback, some of them are assigning homework because of the time limits, and their colleagues are assigning homework, and trying to have consistency, which can sometimes, as I said, be a catch-22, because not all classes, not all teachers, every year is different. So that's kind of how I think we felt, and you know, as I said, the school committee has the policy of best practices, then it trickles down to the principals, and then the staff, and then the students. I still feel that this policy brings people together and really puts it on the forefront, so. And I'm sure moving into the CIT days and the PD planning, this homework topic will be continued throughout, so you're still having dialogue about it, you know. Does that kind of answer your question?
And I think, and just one more, more comment I'd make is that I think, and you mentioned this a little before, because you mentioned about the school committee monitoring the policy, and I think that's something that at the administrative and the committee level that we need to think about. How do we evaluate whether the kinds of changes that we want to see in this policy are actually going forward? How do we evaluate whether it's succeeding?
Well, once again, when you're looking at the old policy to the new policy, we provided a lot of the similar information, a lot of positive, I think, best practices, and the really thing we've taken out of there is the timelines and the restrictions. So I think it's, school committee sets the policy. You've done the revisions. It goes back to principals and teachers, and they're the professionals, they're the experts, and they're in the classroom every day. And I think that they will, continue to work hard and do the right thing. So I think that for school committee to monitor the policy, I don't think you really need to, in the sense that I think the principals will have a good grasp, and the teachers have a good grasp on if there was any changes. You could do another survey, or the principals could do a survey mid-year or end of the year, and similar survey that we did with the previous policy to see if there's been any changes. That could be something done at the building level and a report out or something like that. But no, I think we're in a good place of moving forward, especially with 21st century learning, with individualized instruction, and tying a lot of our curriculum to the real world, and making an extension of the classroom, those assignments to be meaningful to kids. And I think you're there, so.
There was some talk on the subcommittee about doing some more survey data at the end of next year, just to see, because we still left thinking, is this right, is this right? So I think that we'll, I don't know if that subcommittee
always
would
do
kind of
surveys.
continue or do survey or kind of rethink, but I would imagine the leadership team and the superintendent would have ongoing dialogue about this throughout the year. How's it going? What's happening? What can I do to support you?
I think it would be nice to just, maybe, sometime next year, late in the school year, after everyone's had, some time enough to actually work with it and work some of the kinks out, that could be on one of our agendas to have a report back on kind of how it's going so far.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no further discussion, I think. We have two motions. Move to approve the first reading of policy IKB homework. Anybody make that motion? Thank you, Mr. Bjork. A second? Thank you, Mrs. Burns. All in favor of approving the first reading of policy IKB? That's unanimous. And then a second motion to approve the deletion of policy IKBE homework due to the incorporation of both policies into policy IKB-homework. Mr. Bjork, thank you. Mr. Talbot, second. All in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Gallagher.
All right.
Thank you, everybody who's here from the homework committee. I
Yes.
see some people out there. Thank you. All right. Next on our list, we have disposal of textbooks and equipment. Mr. Agerio?
Thank you. Through the course of the year, principals had contacted us and saying that our closets are overflowing and we have all this stuff that is obsolete, broken, non-usable. We want to try to make some room and so forth. So Ms. Raffi, who's in the audience here, kind of spearheaded a project with all the principals, asking them to put a list together of obsolete stuff they do not use, non-usable, and so forth. So in front of you, you have a list of some of the items from some of the schools. We may come back with more sometime next year, but right now, so we're just requesting that we can get rid of some of these textbooks and equipment that really are obsolete, not used, just cluttering the schools and so forth. So.
Questions or comments? Mr. Talbot?
What kind of efforts are we doing to see if these are usable elsewhere?
Yeah, we will reach out to, for example, the SEAM Collaborative, there might be some manipulatives and so forth to see if they can use them or not. A lot of the other stuff, to be honest with you, it's broken stuff, I don't know who's gonna want them. Some of the, even the textbooks, 1968, 72, I think they're a little bit outdated
I
and
just
so
saw
forth.
some smart boards and other types of,
Yeah, we wouldn't be getting rid of them if they weren't broken and not usable, to be honest with you, because, we're pretty frugal, so if something's working or can be used, we don't let them get rid of it. And school districts tend to take anything and everything they can get. So the items that we requested from the principals were stuff that clearly were not usable at all. But, there are a few things on here that, subsequent to the list, that we're going to reach out to a few other places to see if they could, are interested in any of these things. Some different things like I mentioned, the SEAM Collaborative and so forth.
That would be, I was just looking at sort of the math manipulatives, although they're no longer needed by Envisions. That could be something really helpful. So I had the similar question about donating some of this
Yeah.
stuff.
and
But I
we'll-
did.
we'll- Yeah, and we'll reach out to them to see if they could use it or anyone else, so we clearly
And
do that.
I hope that things that, really just can't be used anymore will be responsibly recycled, especially some of the old technology.
Yeah. Yeah,
Presumably, we're not just throwing them in
We're
the
not in the
dumpster.
dumpster?
And sending them away, but, given how, schools, how precious resources and equipment and everything are for schools, that if there's anything they say, no, really, we don't need this, then I think we can take them at their word that
Yeah.
they really have no use for it.
Better said than I said, but yes, you're right, because they'll keep in use anything.
Excellent. Okay, seeing no further discussion. The recommended motion, move to approve the disposal of the obsolete textbooks and obsolete or inoperable equipment which have accumulated in the schools shown on the attached lists. Thank you, Mr. Ragsdale, seconded by Mr. Talbot. All in favor? Excellent, that's unanimous.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, it's what we've all been waiting for. It's the middle school and high school student handbooks. You want to just introduce our first presenters? Or you want them to come over?
Bring Mr. Dan Fairclough and Dr. Jeanette Quirk to talk about the middle school handbooks. Mr. Welch is, I believe, in Disney. So he's unable.
I think I see it all around, but if anybody needs them,
Thank you.
you're not making them stand, that's nice. Hello, my name is Dan Fairclough, and this is
Jeanette Quirk.
Dr. Jeanette Quirk, recently a doctor.
Congratulations.
Thank
We're
you.
very excited for that. Just want to go over the proposed changes. And just remind people that the purpose behind these changes is we talk about curriculum being aligned, but we've been looking at the high schools handbooks a lot, and we're trying to align similar wordage. So those transitions from middle school to high school, there's some similarities and the patterns that go through. Felt it'd be good. We're trying to make this a user-friendly document with a lot of information, so there's not a lot of guessing. It's all pretty crystal clear. And we also think of this as a living document. This is something that we have the ability to always adjust to as the times change and go forward from there. I'll let you start.
And this work was done primarily by Mr. Welsh and our Parent Advisory Council Committee and our Student Advisory Council. So a lot of work was put in on this. They met at least once a month for a couple hours going through the entire document. So would like to thank everyone for that.
And on top of it, they did a lot of work on just getting the fonts and everything and doing all that and kind of cleaning it up, which to me is actually pretty good because you want it to be a presentable document. That's what we mean by the living part, that now it's broken up in very organized manner that can be adjusted very quickly and reasonably, and hopefully we'll find that people can access what they need quicker and easier.
So the first change was found on page 7, where we added core values of successful students. It's a list of approximately 12 to 15, about 12 attributes of good student practice that range from, the first one says follow classroom rules to, following the rules on the bus. Just good things that we would like all students to be doing.
It's apropos that it's at the beginning, so it's to
Yeah.
remind the students. Another thing we added was open house. Surprisingly, it wasn't actually in there. So we described open house and the fact that it is going to be accessible. You're going to hear a lot of things towards the calendar. Our calendar is going to be live and interactive on the webpage. We're working really hard to keep it up to date, times and locations and everything. And on that note, September 13th, 6 o'clock to 8:30, it's already up on our calendar. But every year we won't know that until that point, but that we want to state that the open house is that and where to find the answer. Because if it's not there, they can have a solution.
Also on page 11, we added details describing the Parent Advisory Council and the Student Advisory Council. Oftentimes, as we know, acronyms are thrown around and we don't know what it means. So the group felt that having that information there was important.
And moving on to page 11 again with the school calendar. Once again, we're emphasizing the importance of that access. That's going to be really important to families in the community to know what's going on, and we're going to work really hard to keep it up to date.
Continuing, we talked that it stresses that the school hours are from 7:20 to 1:40, and that's when the staff is on duty, and that the students entering the building should be beginning at 7 o'clock. That is a change that we think is important, and that having that information out there is now in the handbook.
Page 15, bikes, scooters, and walkers. To be honest with you, there was an amazing amount of language in there specifying how to hook a helmet, what age for this, and et cetera, et cetera. We've decided that should be the parent's responsibility, and we basically kind of just brought that part out of it. No doubling and all that kind of stuff was in there. It was very intriguing.
Following that is for car riders, some information on how to properly drop off the students. Every year it seems to be, a learning curve, for lack of a better term. So having some information there about that is also on page 15. As well as I continue, a little change to the cell phone, or a more steadfast understanding of the cell phone policy in the building is that the cell phone should be kept in their students' lockers throughout the day, that the students shouldn't be having them or using them unless specifically directed by a teacher, that they might be using them in their classroom. Personally, I think that that'll become less and less as more of the students have Chromebooks in the building, that they'll have their own technology. But just making it clear that if a cell phone is being seen or used, that it is a violation.
Page 22, we simplified the dress code, and we made sure that we spoke to the impact of student learning, brought it right to the student learning part, especially with images, language, a lot of safety concerns and stuff like that, no guns, weapons, et cetera, and that safety, no spikes, and et cetera.
On page 23, we talk about the no food or beverages outside of the cafeteria, and that the only allowable item is water throughout the day in the classrooms.
The next one's on page 24. It's about backpacks, and we did have a question from the school committee. Just wanted to clarify that we're looking to have the backpacks in the lockers at all times. The teachers do, through separate teams, assign times that they give call it locker breaks, so they are able to access. Most of the times the classrooms are changing right across the hallways, so it's not an issue to carry everything with them for those short period times, but the teachers are really good with breaking it up to when they need to access it. So that's been really good, because then they don't have the bags in the rooms, there's not people walking all over them, there's not stolen items. It also allows them time to keep the kids back and forth without going distances to cause trouble.
On page 30, after-school activities, students must leave the building at 1:40 unless staying after school with a teacher or an activity. Students must have parent permission and picked up in the main entrance. Just further clarification that we just, all the kids are there and accounted for, and that they're there for an activity, and that the parents are aware.
And out through the main door, not side doors.
Correct, thank you.
Yep. Page 36 is Library Media Center. Just as times have changed, we're looking for a little clarity there, that it's not just the library with the books anymore. It's access to do research, there's access to print things up, and all those other items, that's now part of what the library is. It's not just a library, it's a media center.
On page 56, and this was, there was a question regarding this from the school committee, the special statement of fighting, where it clarifies or states what fighting is, as we will use it. It states, defending oneself is not considered an acceptable use for fighting. A fight starts well before the first physical contact is made. Throwing punches in retaliation is not recognizing as defending oneself, and an acceptable defense posture involves only blocking blow. We did check this statement with our legal counsel to make sure that because that was one of the questions that came from it.
It wasn't a question as much as
Sorry.
a concern.
Yeah.
Sure.
With regards to it, with regards to if, we've had instances, as you're
Absolutely.
aware of, if someone needs to defend themselves, as opposed to just absorbing blows, then sometimes it would require a strike back in defense. And I totally get the spirit, and I'm very happy that this was created. That was the only, I think the last two lines of the statement was where my concern sort of, I had a little concern. I certainly am not promoting.
Right.
But I do want, in some of the situations that haven't been encountered, I do want to ensure that our students are able to protect themselves to the best of their ability. I didn't want to limit their ability to protect. I get, and I just was looking for, I don't know, maybe different way of putting it, but if the school council is satisfied with it, then that's fine.
It was just there, I guess, to remind students that, we want to know hitting
Agree.
sort of climate in that, as always, it's best to go to an adult and just remind them that that is ultimately what we're looking for. It also aligns with what is in the high school handbook as well, so it's, I agree. I think we're all in agreement there.
Thank you very
Yep.
much for addressing it.
I'm with MJ on this one.
Yep.
Okay.
Page 82, discipline infractions and responses. Basically, they did a lot of work in this area to clarify it. Many of the infractions in the past edition was ranges of consequences, which gave a lot of, you could weigh one way or the other. This brings it down to first offense, second offense, third offense. For most things, it's pretty concrete on what the offense the consequence that'll go along with that offense.
Excuse me. I have a question.
Yep.
So in the infraction, the, definition, assault on a student, if one student punches another one, is the resource officer, involved in?
Yes, that would
Yes.
be an
And then
assault.
would it be?
Yeah. If it's a one-sided thing, that's not fighting, just to clarify it, that's an assault. If someone does completely nothing and the other person comes down, our resource officer's absolutely involved in that. When we meet with the families, we discuss that with them, and they always know it's also an option to press charges. It's, that's completely different from a fight. Go ahead.
Another question I have.
Yep.
since I see nobody, I see, for second, third, 5 days, when is expulsion?
For
An
the assault?
option? Well, not just for assault, but, for any one of these school threads,
Well,
You know,
when
I
it gets
mean-
to 10, that's generally a time when we have to look at that as to do a manifestation or look at that. If there's charges pressed, then that would be moving into 37 and a half, which is a felony. So all those things would be the time that it would be looked at.
Ultimately, that's the decision of the school principal. There's also there's chapter 37, then there's chapter 37, H&a-half, and then there's 3/4. Each of them have their own definition or added pieces of when you would expel or exclude is the proper term, a student, and there are many steps that need to go through for that. Ultimately, we want to keep all the cherubs that we possibly can.
That's a district policy as well, if I'm correct. Yes.
Yep. Well, the 37's
The law.
Yeah,
The
I
law,
think there's
yeah.
been-
Yep.
I don't see vaping in here.
It is
Under e-cigarettes.
under e-cigarettes. It's under the tobacco policy. We did add
It's the electronic device, but that doesn't really,
an e-smoker, yeah, clarifies as that. And that,
Oh,
I believe it's on page 83, correct me if I'm wrong, where it gives a little bit more definition of, right, because that was one of the things
Yep.
that was added.
I see smoking tobacco violation. I just didn't see the,
Smoking tobacco, e-smoker violation should be.
well, I'm just saying vaping is.
Well, e-cig, they kept it in a little bit of a broader sense because some of them are specific brands and everything, so the whole electronic smoking devices are categorized so that you
I mean,
can.
they're two different, like, technologies, and that's what I guess my question is that vaping and e-cigarettes are really two different, yeah, because one it has
That's why
tobacco,
it
one
says,
it
I
doesn't.
believe it says e-smoker,
Oh, okay, I didn't.
not
I think we're
an
thinking-
e-cigarette.
On page 86.
okay, yeah, it's
If
on
it is,
page
we can
86,
certainly
You see it?
look at that.
83, that's where I was confused
Yeah.
too. It's almost repetitive.
Oh, okay. Okay, I
Mike,
see
does that
that.
have
Oh,
to
okay,
be
yep.
separated,
It's on
the
86.
e-cigarettes from the tobacco and smoking? I
I
mean,
thought it was all in one.
they're all nicotine
Yeah,
agents.
the
so-
bottom, the very bottom on 83, you've got smoking tobacco violation, and then 86.
All right,
Smoking
then we may-
tobacco,
we-
e-smoker.
we
So it's
may
like you
need to
added
look
that,
at
but
that.
didn't remove the other one, I think?
Sure.
Yeah, so what's that on, 83?
83 and
86.
86. And, yeah, you
Yep.
can combine that, I think that's.
Yep, we can definitely look at that and do that. So page 83. So look at combining. Okay.
And then in the district policy, the district policy does clarify like paraphernalia, but not, limited but not excluded to, like e-cigarette devices, vaporizers, cigarette lighters, matches, cigarette holders, pipes, packages, and cigarette papers. So I think it's including, the e-smoker comment is to include
But we
both.
yeah,
But
we can definitely clarify that.
Make it a little bit more specific, if you think that would be.
No, that's fine. I just, like I said, I just want to make sure that vaping part is in there. I don't think it needs to be probably said, but in here that's kind of missing is that assaults against teachers or school staff.
It's there on the top of page 83.
Yeah.
83?
Yep.
Under
Oh,
assault-
staff member, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't see that. I just saw staff member. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other comments on this? I know we've kind of been moving along. I actually have some comments before this, but since we're stopped.
Yep.
I have just a quick question on page 83 under bullying, cyberbullying. I see the first offense is 1 day in-school suspension, but then I look over at the assault and I see 1 day out-of-school suspension, and I was just thinking, was there any talk around, I guess, how bullying can be sort of that silent form of assault, and so how do we differentiate, I guess, the,
Well, I gotta be honest, it wasn't included in that part of the conversation, so I could bring it back to them and have them look at that.
okay.
And if I may, I think that they were taking really the original policy that was
Yeah.
there and making it more specific, that like earlier there were ranges where it was, okay, the first offense will be this, the 1 day, rather than a range.
On that note, may I segue, I think I am in agreement with Mrs. Bryson because
Step up.
the assault on the student, the example pertains to, or threat of imminent harm. And I think bullying that's one of the biggest keys, is a threat of potential harm.
No, I think it's a
So,
valid point to look at that one. Yeah, I got that in my notes, thank you.
Any other comments about
Yeah, hi.
this? Mr. Buick? Sorry, Mr. Tom.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I just had on page 23, kind of going back, the food and beverages.
Wait, actually, I'm sorry, can we stay where we are and then keep moving, and then we'll all go back if we have any specific questions? Is that okay?
That's fine.
Is that all right? Do you have something specific to this?
Nope, I thought we were,
Okay, are we moving on?
let's move on.
Okay, let's move on. Let's finish, and then because I think some of us had earlier comments and we're holding them, so I kind of want to at least get us through this so that we don't get too off track.
Yeah, there's
Then
only
we
two,
can-
there's
only two more.
Two quick things and then
Yeah.
a little additional things that are in the work. We did add on page 92, 94, a copy of what the Corey form looks like, just to take out that question. Parents, sometimes there's a lot of curiosity, and an example of what the Wilmington School District uses for an incident reform form.
Excellent, thank you. Okay.
And just one more thing, I'm sorry, and this might help with your comment. This is a living document, but there are still things that we hope to work on. And 4 areas that we are talking about is clarification on a parent's notes for absences and how they will be recorded in Aspen. Clarification on the START team, which is our school truancy attendance and review team, with the new law that has come about how, what the state views as excessive absences. Also as well, where we added information on the PAC and the SAC, we were thinking of adding information on our CPAC as well. And then there is an area where, for the lunches, where there is a alternative when a student reaches a certain limit of if they owe a certain amount of money, that there'll be an alternative lunch.
I believe that's $10.
Yeah, there is some wording that we're looking to insert into the handbook
There
as
is a
well.
new policy that was approved
Right.
by the
Right.
school committee.
And it came in after the fact, but we're going to get it in there.
Maybe a new homework policy.
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna
So, as well,
say.
homework.
Living document.
Living document.
Yeah.
Homework policy.
So, that's-
All right, thank you.
Did you have a question?
Do we want to go back now?
Yeah, so on page 23, the food and beverages, it's saying that they can only have water, but they don't say what type of container that is it like in a bottled water with a cap? Can they have like a thermos, or not thermos, I'm dating myself here, but
Yeah.
like
Water
a
bottle.
water bottle, like,
Generally speaking, what I've seen is just, they usually have just the bottles right out of the cafeteria. That's usually where they get them. It's not to say they can't. I've seen other students with, like the aluminum ones and
yeah.
such like that,
But
yeah.
then we just don't know what's in them, without seeing. I mean, that's what
Yeah.
concerns me, is that, if they're just in a regular water bottle, that's fine, but, when they're in a don't really know what's in there.
Well, recycling is such a big piece too. That's, you know what I mean, not to,
But if they have like the clear one like that, but like a cylinder type one that's,
no,
Color,
no, I
you know,
agree,
you don't know
I
what's in
agree.
there.
It's finding that balance, I think, It's also, it's a responsibility and dependence. It's, being responsible, they're caught,
Yeah.
And I have to say, I don't think it matters what the container is. Students can just as easily pour something into a water bottle and it be clear, or with one of those flavored packets that makes it, to me, it doesn't matter. It's the.
And on a
It's
positive
just as
note, I
easy.
really only see water. And I
Yeah.
think their kids are pretty well disciplined to follow the water rule.
So, but we could be specific. We can add that they could be in a water bottle or container.
yeah, just something clear.
Sure.
I will. But clear, I'm just thinking I'd be careful about that, only because we have these aluminum bottles, the Swell bottle, and that is a big change for people who do bring their water in an aluminum bottle, so just a
Maybe we can look
Just
at
a
the
thought.
consequence for not having
little
water.
insulated, keep it cold, yeah.
Yeah.
So just a thought.
Maybe we can look at consequences for not having water if they get caught, or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure that's covered in the other
Yeah.
pieces. Okay, yeah, Mr. Bjork.
I just want to go back to the special statement on fighting, and I'm quite certain I'm in the minority here. But I
you're
just
on
want to say my
page
piece.
56?
So I'm on page 56.
56.
So, one of the lines, the fight starts well before the first physical contact is made. Many times the preliminary actions involve a verbal exchange. That's true, but there's also the term sucker punch.
Yeah.
So I think that especially at that age, quite often things will move to a physical state without very much warning. And I'm concerned about the idea of my child having to defend themselves only by blocking until potentially, if they're in a secluded spot, until the assailant runs out of steam and energy. Again, I understand I'm in the minority and you've had legal counsel. I'm personally not all that comfortable with the idea that my child would find repercussions from defending themselves by using strikes.
I would also, again, as my earlier comment, I would have to support Stephen this, in his comment. I think there's a lot of discretion that needs to be taken amongst with principal, because I think what's usually occurs is it's never not known something's going on. If you're in the schools, you know where those little facets are, those rough areas. So for something to just come out of the blue and it's never, usually in middle school, it's always pre-existing before it hits the head, you know what I mean? And I just caution anything written that would minimize a potential victim's right and ability to defend themselves. And again, as I kind of referred to the four, I think I sent the 4 elements that are required for a self-defense by law. I just would be very cautious about not allowing potential victims' ability to defend themselves to the best of their ability against their attacker. And I think my administrators can take that into consideration if events happen, or when events happen. I'm also, and I've always been a little concerned with regards to the situations when the attacker attacks somebody that, like I said, it's not just a nuance, oh, by the way, you tripped me, I'm pounding you. It's always many cases it leads up, I should say. I just, punishing the victim only adds to the mental, emotional abuse already received prior. So I just have to put my faith in my administrators that they take case-by-case basis to the best of their ability investigating it thoroughly. So, you know, I don't think you could ever put it black and white in writing in a handbook. You know what I mean? It is.
I agree, there's always discretion and going back.
But I also wouldn't want it listed, though, that I'm all about the spirit of what the statement's trying to do, but I don't want it to be used against somebody with the best intent,
It's
if you know what I
implementation,
mean.
Right.
So
And
that's
as-
why I was hoping
As
for
you
better
said, that
wording.
if there's stuff that is rising up to that occasion and that we're aware of it, many
Mm-hmm.
times you'll hear from one of the administrators that we know this is happening, if anything goes any further, you're in trouble, not the person that, like that. So if you preempt a lot of that,
Mm-hmm.
and I do respect the sucker punch and that part, I've unfortunately had been through this experience from my previous school, that's an assault. So generally speaking, what always happens in that situation, that it goes right to your SRO, and the person that's the victim is the victim, even if they do defend themselves beyond the blocks. What we're trying to do is, what you spoke of, is the spirit of it. We don't want kids to say, that's my excuse why I can come back over the
Absolutely.
top, and they hurt, the instigator ends up getting hurt more than the
I just
thing.
don't want it misinterpreted and then
Yep.
used against us.
Yep. No, I respect that.
And that's, I think, what.
Absolutely.
Yep.
If I may, and I had spoke to Andy about this one too, and where he was coming from is just exactly what Mr. Faircloth said, that we don't want to, and it's tough to put in black and white here, but that someone to use self-defense as an excuse for beating someone up.
Right.
You know,
Right.
just
Right.
that type of thing. So from that standpoint, and then I think it comes to some discretion that the building principal has.
I know that there is a legal phrase, and I'm blanking on it, but only up to force necessary.
Right.
And I'm blanking on the rest of it, but that, I'd be much more comfortable with that in here. But again, I know,
I know what phrase you're talking, it's a reasonable response, it's a police term that they use.
Objectively reasonable degree of force used in response to a objectively reasonable fear or injury is another way of putting it. But I would like to ask, though, if we can, at least, at the very most, remove the last sentence. An acceptable defense posture involves only blocking blow. I think that, I'm really hung up on that particular sentence, too,
Right,
because
so
I think.
stopping it after, or other adult first, period.
certainly look at that. There's no problem with that.
Yeah, because I just don't want it to be
It still
conceived
has
that
the
all you
same
can do
spirit
is
without that.
suffer the blows,
Yeah,
you know.
absolutely. I got you. That makes sense.
I think the message is there's no
Yeah,
fighting in school.
and that's what we're trying
I'm
to
not looking
get.
to institute Thunderdome or anything.
No,
Mr. Ragsdale?
I think I find myself agreeing a lot with Steve and MJ on this. I'm increasingly uncomfortable with this section. I mean, I think we all know where the idea is coming from, that we want to be de-escalating physical confrontations. And we certainly don't want giving people justifications for why they think, oh, but it's okay now, when it's not necessary. We've all had cases, if we're parents with our, kids who come and go, oh, he started, someone hits them, oh, he started it. It's like, I don't care who started it. And,
Right.
but that's kind of with, it's different when it's, within a family where you have authority over both of the children. I mean, when you're dealing with kids from different families who are, in a separate situation, like in a school, I think that the first statement is just not true, in my view. And I fully understand the sense of it, but I think as a part of stated policy, I'm uncomfortable with this. I think that the discretion, this needs to be, I think, a place where discretion and common sense in the administration, when these are reported, has to rule the day. Because, the idea that if you were in fact being physically attacked, that your responsibility is not to potentially defend yourself, but to go find a teacher. If someone's on top of you and what you're not supposed to, strike back.
Can I ask
I
you a
find that
question,
to be
Dave?
problematic. Sure.
And I think, do you capture the spirit of what they're trying to say with regards to retaliation? Like if you've been bugging me, I'm not gonna come off across the table, and that doesn't give me justification, you know what I mean, to attack you, I think that was kind of the spirit of what they were trying to encompass, per se. Is there anything that you might recommend? Because I definitely see your point. How would you deliver a message saying that fighting is not acceptable, and self-defense is not always an excuse? I don't want to say excuse, that's not the right word. It's not always self-defense. I mean, how do you?
If you wanted to do it, I suppose you would try and say something that students are expected to, de-escalate any physical confrontation when reasonably possible.
Or get an adult?
Essentially, you have a duty to retreat if it's possible.
Or seek an adult?
Or seek an adult, something, I mean, again, not quite that legalistic language, like duty to
Right.
retreat is more of a legal term, but.
If people want to just give me some of those statements, email them to me. I can take them, we can process them with the SAC. I don't want to leave them out of this, so they work so hard
No,
at this.
absolutely.
And we can just rebuild it, because I believe we all have the same spirit of it, like MJ says.
It's a
but
hard topic
we-
to put into words on
Put into
paper.
words, I think we can work with that.
And if I may, with all this being said, by the way, we've reviewed these every year since I've been on the committee, and there's always changes, but it's obvious how intensively you guys have gone through this, and I really, I think we all applaud all the hard work that you've done. So I know that this is a long discussion, but I hope you understand
an
what
important
appreciating.
No, very much.
And if you do have comments, if you can send them to me, I'll forward them
All right.
to the middle school.
okay.
That makes good sense. Okay. Any other, I have some you have some comments too? All right, go
Questions
ahead.
about a couple of other.
Yeah, just tell us what page, please.
Page 22, so I just had something that I'm not quite clear on for the cell phone policy, that the first sentence seems to indicate that the issue is about that they can't have them in class unless it's, allowed and part of the lesson. But then it says that they're required to store their cell phones in the locker during the school day. So are they essentially not allowed to use their phones without permission at all in the
Correct.
school?
Correct.
Okay, because at the beginning it looked like it was just a class issue, but this is saying that they can't have them at lunch, they can't have them in the
No
halls.
lunch, no
But
halls.
there's,
That's where all the problems are happening, so, but we don't want to limit them. But with the technology, Chromebooks coming in, we're hoping it's not an issue, but some teachers will say, we're going to do Cahoots in the classroom today, bring your cell phones. So we don't want to eliminate that yet, but we don't want them, we don't want them in the bathrooms, in the cafeteria.
And especially where we're not one-to-one for the entire building next year, we still need to have that ability that the teachers can use them.
So I think that it might clarify it if it just, if essentially in classes is just deleted from that first sentence. So it just says cell phones are not allowed unless students are specifically requested to have their cell phone for class, something
Yep.
like that. So probably get rid of that.
How do we deal with the,
With the smartwatches?
with smartwatches?
Well, the interesting part with the smartwatch is most of the time if the phone's not near them, they don't work that well. So if it's semi-close, you might be able to get it, but yeah, you're talking about the next realm of what we're worrying about, yes.
Yeah, I mean, banned them on MCAS the other year, so.
They actually do take them off everybody, so you have to hand in all your watches at MCAS.
Okay, and then I had one more question, or one more issue that I wanted to talk about, which is about the changes to the dress code. So the old text above the new text, because it doesn't look like anything was deleted, it looks like there are just additions here, is that, this is also on page 22, that it begins. So I think that the first several paragraphs, the non-red paragraphs, is just the old policy as I remember it. Where it's basically,
The headgear and all that, yeah.
basically, you know,
Yep.
it's basically the students and the parents, and then there's, you know, health and safety, destruction of property, causing disorder or disruption, is kind of the standards. And then that's, some of that has gotten to a little more detail in the additional language, especially the part that distract or detract from the educational mission. And then when we get to the last bullet point about students wearing excessively short clothing, one thing I just want to put out there is that this is clearly something that really just applies to girls and not to the boys.
I get it.
It's not an issue with the boys wearing short clothing, and
I believe that was not
I
even supposed to be in there.
I have to be honest, I thought that was supposed to be removed.
Yeah.
We were trying to make the policy more.
Yeah.
okay, because
Which I'm
I
surprised
had
it
that
was
same
in there.
question,
I didn't think
actually.
it was still in there. It was supposed to be more of a universal policy,
Yeah, that was,
not specific to any gender, so.
Because I had the same question
yeah,
about,
we
and the
spoke
idea
to
of
that. I was
shaming
surprised
and
to see
I'll
it.
clarify that, just to make
Yeah.
sure, because it is still in there, but that was my understanding.
Yeah.
that would be great if you could bring that back, because I think
Yeah,
there's so
no,
much work
I
being done
believe it
right
was
now with
taken
dress
out. I don't know
codes.
how, we talked
And
about
this
that the
idea
other
of,
day.
Yeah.
I think I read a policy that was really good that talked about it is not up to the person wearing the clothes to worry about disrupting or distracting others, that it's up to the person to not be So I think that putting that ownership on
And
is
that's
really
the
important.
discussion we
Right.
had. That's
And
why I
even
was
with the
surprised to see
conversation we
that.
had with Mr. Welsh prior to him,
Great.
that was the discussion, so.
Yeah, so
So I think we really do need to be careful there.
Yeah,
no, I-
With
I
this
agree.
idea of shaming and all
I
that.
have it in master notes that way.
Yeah, I got it.
All right. I just had one quick question. On page 9, and this was a question I'm just curious about, in the chain of communication, and I like that it's up front. I think that's great. On the special education piece, I was just curious. So it says, step 1, and all the way through step 6, but Alice Brown-LeGrand is not listed anywhere here, the director of and I was just wondering about that. Is there a place, so just a
No, it should
question,
be.
I guess, right, for,
Makes sense, that should be right.
All right,
so I don't know, just a thought.
but I do think that comes from the district-wide.
It does,
So
yeah.
I think,
Right, so that's a
nobody-
district.
So I don't know where that
I don't-
goes
I don't
to,
know,
but I
yeah.
just was like, that's interesting, so
Yeah.
I would imagine.
Alice, yeah.
Yeah, we can bring that to their attention.
I think she would be in replace of the assistant superintendent, it would be her and then the
Right.
superintendent.
Yeah, but I think I saw that in the other one too, so.
But I think that's district, so
I
I think we
agree.
need
Think
to
I'd
look
remember
at that.
right, well, but that's how it would be.
Yeah, it
because-
makes sense to me.
I mean, that's how I followed it since my kids started.
And then on page 17, I know you added the section about car riders, and so I think there's another piece here about students being dropped off. It
What
seems
page?
repetitive, sorry, page 17. That last paragraph, I think is repeating what you've already added in on page 15 with the car riders. So I don't know if you just were trying to reiterate it, or if it was maybe left
But
over.
I think it's reiterated because is it in the policy? Is that why? I think these are,
So you have to keep it in there?
yeah,
Yeah.
it's part of the policy, I think. So I think we were reiterating it to make, we wanted the first part to be more clear and upfront for
Okay,
parents.
so this wasn't enough, that it needed to be,
Right.
I got it.
And we even included a map. I don't know if you've seen the map. And
It
you-
really is an issue,
You
isn't
laugh,
it?
but I'm going to tell you, I think it's people are very visual. And it's really about safety. It is, you would, you know,
I can't, it's very confusing.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's not confusing, it's funny to me how every day there's something, it's a little bit different. I'm always
Yeah.
like, that's interesting.
Should see it at the end of the day when the special ed buses come. Everybody's jumping in the line.
And then I had the same comment Mr. Ragsdale had about dress code, and I think that's all. Anybody else have any comments that they want to highlight before? Well, thank you. This looks really fantastic, and we're really excited about all the work you've done. Thank you very much, and thanks for being here to
Thank you,
present it.
thank
We
you.
appreciate it. Do you have anything else? Okay. Ms. Peters will walk us through the high school student parent handbook.
Let's start off with the fighting policy.
We don't have any fights at high school. Actually, we really don't have lots. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
We had very few changes, and they're really minor, because we have been working on this particular document for a long time, over the past several years. But our first change was just to add in 3 sentences regarding earbud use. And this really is for safety. We do not want students having earbuds in both ears during the passing time and at lunch. We don't want headphones covering both ears, just because they can't hear what's going on, and if we have a drill, they won't hear it. So it's really just for safety that we added that, because we don't allow earbuds in the classroom, but they can use them during passing and at lunch. We slightly changed some of the policy around tardiness. We just really went from 5, 6, 7, and 8 to 4, 5, 6, and 7. Our assistant principals are now actually stationed in the hallway in the foyer until 8 o'clock, and they hand out the detentions to those students who are tardy, and that has cut down on tardiness quite a bit. So this is just being a little bit more specific. The other policy just indicated that we would have some consequence on the 4th, 5th, 6th, and so forth. Now it's set, pretty specific. One of the teachers had brought to my attention that, we're now going to have 3 classes with Chromebooks, and they did want some type of statement regarding being prepared for class with the Chromebook, since it's really now what they plan their lessons around, the use of the Chromebook. So they do want to make sure that students have them at all times. They have their own policies on being prepared for class, which they will present to their class at the beginning of the school year, but they did want me to have something in the handbook related to that. We have a chart that indicates the infractions and a little bit of a description about the infraction and then the consequence. And there are several things that we've added that are in other parts of the handbook that we wanted to put specifically in the chart, so it's very clear. A lot of times, we haven't had some of these things actually come up in the past, and since they have come up, we do want to address them and articulate the consequence. For example, the building safety violation. We never really had what we thought was a problem, but we do have students that may let other students in the building through other doors, so we want to make sure that it's clear that they're not allowed to do that. And the others, again, we have interdisciplinary block protocols, and we just want to make sure that we have a description of if they're not being followed, that we do have a consequence to go with that. Skipping lunch block, that does happen, and again, it's never been articulated as an infraction, so we did include that. The other infractions were part of other statements in the handbook that we just moved to the chart so that it was clear. And then we do have a special statement that we did include regarding excessive conduct violations. We have eligibility policies around academics, and we decided that we'd like to have eligibility policies around behavior. And so we're looking at excessive number of violations. We did not put a number. We didn't really put a description of the kind of violation, but we are looking at students who do excessively, are given consequences, not being allowed to attend a dance or some other school-sponsored event if it comes to that. So there's a consequence around excessive infractions around conduct, and not just around academics, which we do have, and we've had for many years, ineligibility to attend dances based on academics. And we are planning to re-examine the attendance policy and also a policy around vaping and vapes and being in possession of vapes. And we do have a policy now, but we're looking to re-examine it once Dr. Brand is on board. And we'd like to look at some of the things that have come up in our meetings regarding the handbook and those policies in particular.
Your hand up.
I do. All right. So, one thing that caught my eye was the building safety violation. Obviously, in this day and age, this is an extremely serious situation, and I'm glad you're taking it as such with starting out with the first offense, 2 days of out-of-school suspension. But I'm curious if at the third offense, they've done 5 days of out-of-school suspension, and a fourth should occur.
I'm sorry.
And a fourth occurrence should occur, this would be a serious problem. Would you want to add an expulsion hearing?
I don't think the law allows
Allows
us
it? Okay.
to have an expulsion hearing based on that.
For that,
We certainly could go through, if we do get someone with the third offense, which I highly doubt, because I think this comes more from when we had a student safety committee formed, and this was one of the things that they brought up. I don't think it happens often that this, that they let anyone in the building. And I don't think we'd get past the third offense, but I think if we did, then we would have to consider maybe 6, 7, 8 days OSS. I don't think we can go to 10 days, because then it would really probably result in having to go further. I don't think it will get to that point.
Okay.
If it does, I think we just have to deal with it then and add it then.
Thank you.
And just so it's noted, the special statement of finding, everything we've just said, just for the sake of time, applies to this as well.
The what?
As we addressed it with the middle school handbook,
Oh, I see.
it's the same, just so that it's stated, it's the same
Okay.
thought. Thank you.
And I'll reiterate that with dress code as well. There's that same term in there, does not cause disorder or disruption on page 41. So I guess it's the same conversation we just had with the middle school handbook.
Okay.
And that same term on 42. The last bullet, students may not wear excessively short clothing, et cetera. So that same conversation. Other comments from the board? Oh, Mr. Ragsdale.
So Linda, on the, basically on the revision sheet, so where the chart basically begins at the bottom, physical altercation, the first item on that list to the added specific infractions. So this is for the minor physical altercation, so pushing, shoving, inappropriate physical contact, first day offense, 1 day out of school suspension. So I mean, maybe I'm thinking about pushing differently from what I normally think of, but that seems like a pretty strong response for, maybe I'm just misinterpreting what I'm pushing. But for something, I mean, I guess when you get into the shoving, it's certainly inappropriate physical conduct, that's one thing, but I don't know. Pushing seems to me like half the school would be suspended if this
Pushing with
was,
intent, maybe?
if this was literally enforced.
Well, except this is the high school level, it might be different from, for sure.
Right, it's not elementary kids like pushing each other on the
Right.
playground.
Yeah.
I mean,
As I said, I don't think it's that it happens a lot. I just think when it does happen, it's more serious than just kids pushing just in a
Just got
fun
it,
way.
just-
I don't think it gets to that point where it's serious. But when it does get to a point that it's serious, I think we have to address it as an altercation.
I was just gonna say that I'm assuming that the teacher has sees two kids fooling around
Yeah,
friendly.
yeah.
They're not gonna invoke this. But if somebody's pushed against the lockers, that might be a different story. I'm hoping that discretion is there.
I have a question about the verbal assault threat, which is under assault student, and then bullying, unlike the middle school where bullying is right there, this doesn't say bullying. Is that bullying?
No.
Okay. And is bullying here? Am I,
Bullying is in the handbook. We have the bullying policy
right, but it's
within the
not
handbook.
specifically here.
Right, because
Okay.
it's a separate, to us, it's separate. It's a process that we go
Yeah,
through.
yeah.
The investigation. This is not bullying. This is a one-time threat. Bullying is more repeated, something that's happening often that needs to be addressed, and there's obviously a victim. This is more, you say something very inappropriate in terms of a threat to someone.
Well, bullying, I think, as I felt, and I've said before too, bullying does carry the same attack as well as threat of imminent harm as this verbal assault. So I think they're almost the same. You know what I mean? They can differentiate, but bullying also has that context. And what's different with bullying is that it's repetitive as opposed to one time, you know what I mean?
And I think that's why we'd like to have some consequence to that, because if you find that it's not bullying because it's a one-time, there's no consequence. So instead of waiting for it to happen, so that it is repeated, if it happens, you address it immediately as a verbal assault.
I think with the use of social media too, it kind of complicates this, because they can be threatening, social media can threaten from anywhere, you know what I mean? And
But I think you need this differentiation
agree.
precisely because, bullying has a specific definition under the law
Right.
and also triggers a certain process that needs to
Right.
go under the Massachusetts bullying law. And if you don't have that kind of repeated elements that allows you to, which is pretty strong. I mean, it should be something that is kind of ongoing for all the process that goes through. But that doesn't mean that, obviously, once is too much too. You want to have a policy in place where you can stop,
no,
a
of
single
course, I'm
a
not
single
saying
incident as
eliminate,
well.
I'm just,
I guess my question then
I
is,
see an
it's more
overlap.
for Mr. Ruggiero, Mr. Gallagher. If we're doing obviously the bullying law, and it's phrased differently here in high school than it is in the middle school, because on the middle school, it is listed. And so now I'm thinking, that's probably not, for our students, that's pretty confusing. Oh, well, there it was this. So I think when they're coming to high school, they're like, but wait a minute, I don't see bullying here. It was on mine in middle school, but you're right. It's a separate process. And so I think we need to just sort of make sure that's clean between the middle school and the high school handbooks.
sense.
Does that make
I
sense?
consider the bullying
that
a
makes sense.
district policy.
Right,
So, and
That
this
makes sense,
would
though.
just be at the high school, if the high school student makes a verbal attack on a student,
Right,
then there is
exactly.
punishment.
You're
That's
s-
separate.
Do you hear
You're
what I'm
saying
saying?
it's at the middle school, but not here, but I think, these are just the additions. I think bullying is in the handbook.
no, I know that.
Okay,
I'm saying on their chart,
right.
so this isn't really I
These
think
are-
this is
chart
fine
only
as
of the new
is.
things, though.
Right, but
Okay.
at the high school, bullying and cyberbullying, it's a process, it's located in a different place, and so then the middle school one should probably mimic that as well. Why would it be, it's not different, it's the same law. So how we post, I'm saying this is fine, but we probably, and this is why I said it was more for the superintendent, assistant superintendent, what are we doing there? What
Okay, I see
what does
you're
that look
saying.
like? Does that make sense? I think just confusing for parents and for, does that make sense? Okay. Right, because at first I was like, wait a minute, in school, but then I'm like, oh, right.
Right, and the
There's a whole
bullying
policy here, there's a
policy
whole
is
policy
district-wide.
that we didn't even talk about when we were looking at the middle school handbook. But now we're like, oh, of course, it's the policy, but here it is listed, first offense in school, which is really not necessarily the, right? So I'm just saying it should be clean. We should probably remove it, I would imagine, or at least talk to your SAC about that, yeah. Sorry,
Okay, no.
very confusing, but. Any other questions or comments for Ms. Peters?
So
Thank you.
well done once again
It
every
looks
year.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
And
you.
this is so helpful, thank you.
Welcome, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. All right, this is our last item under new business. We need to discuss the school committee secretary vacancy. So with Mrs. Kane stepping down from the school committee, she was our secretary, and so we need to fill that position. And I know that MJ had, we all remember, MJ had expressed interest in doing that, was initially nominated for that, so I don't know if anyone.
We offer that as a nomination.
Nomination a second. Mr. Ragsdale. And are you okay with that?
Yes, I know, thank you.
Before we vote you in,
Do you accept?
everybody in favor of having Mrs. Burns as our secretary?
Is this a roll call or a?
No,
No,
This is
Or just
just
a-
by vote.
just by vote. All right, that's everybody. Thank you.
thank you, folks, I appreciate that.
And I also have just an announcement to make and a save the date for the school committee. And I'll just, well, I'll let us, so us, school committee, we're gonna have a joint meeting with the Board of Selectmen on August 13th at 7 PM during their regularly scheduled meeting. And that is open to the public to discuss the open position, the vacancy on the school committee.
Discuss and ideally appoint.
Yes. So that will happen on the 13th at 7. And I'm also just going to read the school committee vacancy aloud for the public and for us. This was posted today at 12:15. The town of Wilmington is accepting letters of interest from residents who would like to volunteer their services as a member of the school committee. Letters of interest may be directed to Kevin Kyra, Chairman of the Board of Selectmen, at 121 Glen Road, Wilmington, no later than 4:30 PM on Friday, July 27th, 2018. Do you want to add anything about this?
No, I think the joint meeting on the 13th of August, I believe it's at 7 o'clock, but it'll be posted both by the Board of Selectmen and the school committee will post that meeting.
It's 7.
Is it definitely 7?
Definitely 7, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I think at that meeting, one of the agenda items will be a potential interview or discussion with the candidates, whoever should come forth, and then I think it's a roll call vote, Board of Selectmen and school committee.
And so, one, we just want to urge, obviously, all the school committee members to make it a point to be there for that. Mrs. Burns?
I had a quick question, if it's known at this juncture. Will we be, how will it be notified as to the candidates that have come forth with, of interest?
I
with interest?
believe the cutoff date, July 27th, the letters of interest would go to Mr. Kyra. Copies will be made and distributed to the school committee, probably come to the superintendent's office.
Right,
And then we'll distribute it to the school committee.
for
Anyone-
preparation for
anyone
that
who-
meeting.
Whatever letters of interest
Okay.
They received, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, yeah,
Are
hopefully
those
that's right.
letters of interest public?
I would think so.
I would imagine,
Yeah, I would think
Because
that.
it seems like they would be.
yeah,
Yeah.
I would imagine they would be.
All right, so after that deadline, then I guess that people could, well, that's an issue for town hall to figure out how to give people access to,
They're all going to town
Access
hall
to that.
initially, so.
and us.
Yeah, they could make anybody can make a public documents request for that information.
Any questions about that? Comments? Okay. All right. Public comment. Anybody have a public comment? Seeing none. Subcommittee reports.
None at this time for me.
Well, you saw mine, so you saw Sean's. Subcommittee reports, anything else? No. Correspondence, I don't have anything, do you? We don't have a secretary, but I don't have anything. Before we do adjourn, though, I just wanted to say a thank you and a goodbye to Mr. Gallagher. This is your last meeting with us.
Yeah, thank you. Wow.
We're not applauding you leaving, by the way.
Thank you so much.
A send-off and a
Yes,
congrats and
thank you. It's been awesome.
congrats to the
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean, for everything.
I appreciate it. Thank you, guys. I know this guy, so good luck.
You had 2 more days of handshakes.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Appreciate
You
it.
know where to reach me if you have any past issues.
Gallery back there. Thank you, guys. Awesome.
Sean's really milking this now.
Oh, come on now.
What's that?
And obviously, we'll be continuing on with Mr. Gier right by our side, but thank you. I know you know how grateful we are to all that you've done for us and with us for the past year and
Thank you.
such, but we just want to just make sure we
Thank you.
acknowledge
Thank
it.
you,
So
everyone.
thank you for keeping us steady. All right, any other comments or a final motion?
I would offer that final motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
All in favor? All right, thank you, everyone. Good night.